It's just taking 1 second. Okay, we are live now. So let's get started. For those of you that don't know or haven't heard about SARC, my name is Jennifer. I am one of the Education and Outreach Specialists here at the Sexual Assault Resource Center, also known as SARC. Again, for those of you who don't know, we are a nonprofit agency that serves survivors of sexual violence. We have completely free and confidential services, and some of these services include free counseling. We also have a 24-hour crisis hotline that anyone can call at any time, talk about maybe something they're experiencing, maybe ask questions on how to support one of their friends or family members. And we also do education. So that's my part. That's what I do. We educate the community on various topics around sexual violence. So that is what we're here to do today. We are here because January is National Stalking Prevention and Awareness Month. So we are here to discuss and talk about what stalking is, what are the behaviors, what to do if you've experienced stalking, and a lot of different aspects of it, especially with today and everybody is online and digital. We are going to talk about that for a second as well. But I am going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves before we get started with our discussion today. But before I do that, I do want to say that if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to put them in the comments and we will try to address them at the end. If you have a more personal question or something that you want to keep confidential, please call our hotline and we can answer that through that. If you have anything that you want to keep confidential, don't put it in the comments just because we do have other people that will be able to see it. So our hotline is 979-731-1000. And we will attach that in the comments later after this live has ended. So I want to get started so we can get to our really awesome discussion today. Whoever wants to start can. Whoever wants to start first, and just quick introduction on, who you are and why this topic pertains to your position or job.
Shall I go first? I'm Ray Blair. I am an attorney in Florida, and I'm with a domestic violence shelter here. So our role primarily is with assisting survivors of domestic violence finding their way to safety out of that relationship and into long-term safety and stability. And we encounter stalking most often when the victim of domestic violence is trying to leave a relationship and the other partner is reluctant to let her leave. Occasionally it is there's a gender reversal, but more often than not, it is the woman who is being stalked in those situations. And so we spend a lot of time talking about how to recognize stalking, how to avoid it, how to think through safety planning from a technology perspective, and just a simple safety in your world kind of perspective as well.
I can go next. So my name is Ann Rubel, and I get to work for Twin City Mission. It's a local nonprofit, and in the domestic violence services, I'm a outreach and prevention specialist. So basically what that means is I get to go out into the community and educate and talk about domestic violence and just start that conversation. So yeah, just like Ray was saying, is that stalking is within that domestic violence umbrella.
Okay, and that leaves me. So I am Dr. Denise Kristofi, and I currently serve as a health promotion coordinator in our offices of the Dean of Student Life at Texas A&M University. And our health promotion is really, what we do is we're really a public health education department within the university. So we focus primarily on prevention education related to interpersonal violence, alcohol, and other drug use. We also do general wellness programming, so thinking about the 8 dimensions of wellness and how to support those in our students and have them really embrace what we call a culture of holistic well-being that fosters their personal, professional, and educational success. And I've been there now for almost 3 years. I am the lead on violence prevention programming with one of my other colleagues, Jasmine Jones. So we really split that bystander intervention, trauma-informed care programming, education on healthy relationships and consent.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say we're very privileged to be able to listen to all of you guys today and your expertise and your experience with working with individuals who've experienced stalking. So we are going to jump into our discussion today. Thank you all for sharing. Again, we're really, really excited and happy for you to be here. So let's get started. How is stalking defined, and what are considered stalking behaviors? Now, I know we hear the phrase, I stalked you on Facebook, or I stalked you on Instagram. We hear stalking all the time. We hear it in the media, we hear it in movies. We hear so many different versions of it, but what does it actually mean? And what are the actual behaviors that are considered stalking?
Yes, I can start us off. So how we define it is a pattern of behaviors directed at one person that would cause a reasonable person to fear. And so that can look like in a lot of different ways. So it's unwanted phone calls, texts, interactions. Maybe they're showing up to their work uninvited and leaving gifts and stalking them, through social media, like you were saying. There's a lot of information that can be put on a social media, so we have to be careful on that. But it can look like a lot of different ways to different people.
I think it's important to know that every state defines stalking a little differently from a legal perspective. And so the general things we can say, like Ann is mentioning, are harassing behavior, but harassing includes things like bill collectors that call 3 times a day. So stalking is more personal, but it's about the fear that the stalker will hurt you, hurt your reputation, hurt someone in your family. And so it's important to know, if you think you might be a victim of stalking, to know what your state's laws are and how stalking is defined. Some states require that fear be involved. So stalking behavior could be legally stalking in one state, but not in another if the victim didn't perceive it with fear. So it's important to know how your state perceives that and whether or not that fear perception is reasonable or not. And so particularly if it goes on for long, if you feel like your safety is really in danger, consulting with an expert and getting some legal opinion about how stalking is defined in your community and what your legal options are can be really important to get a head start on that fairly quickly.
And I will add, from the university perspective, we follow our Department of Civil Rights and Equity Investigations Title IX education-based definition, which is very similar to what Ann and Ray already described, but it's basically a course of conduct directed at one person that would cause a reasonable person to either suffer emotional distress or fear for their safety or the safety of others. So it really is, in a lot of ways, the things that were already described here. I know that we're going to talk about it in a technological environment versus in person, and what that looks like, but it can happen in either. It can also be direct or indirect. I think sometimes when we think about the idea of stalking, we think about this direct confrontational behavior, right? So the person's present when it's happening, and we know that a lot of that unwanted communication and a lot of that intimidation can sometimes come obviously directly from that person, but in an indirect way. Right? So leaving things like traces that they've been there on a doorstep or on a car, right? Or sending direct messages or text messages, or even using things like GPS trackers without their intended target's knowledge, that they're tracking their whereabouts, either through an application or whether they've put something on a vehicle, those types of behaviors. So it can be direct or indirect, which I think is really important for our audience to know as well.
To that point, one of the scariest kinds of stalking I ever saw was from that context, sort of indirect. So the stalker, and a former paramour, had managed to put a keystroke tracker on her computer, so he knew what website she was visiting. Well, he would then order items that she had considered on shopping websites and have them delivered to her. And just knowing that he was watching her behavior and sending things and then putting himself in a position to see whether or not she wore it was really quite terrifying.
That does sound very, very terrifying. And I know that I've heard some examples that are similar to that. And without the context of this person experiencing the fear, and without the context of this person buying gifts that this person shouldn't even know about, people might think, oh, that's so sweet, he's buying you gifts, or she's buying you gifts, or wow, they must really like you because they're buying you so many gifts. So we are going to mention that a little bit later, but it's interesting how without the context of this person experiencing this fear, and without the context of where these gifts are coming from, it seems kind of normal and sweet. But when we really look at it and you really dig deep and see what's going on, it's extremely different situation and extremely traumatic situation for this person that's experiencing it. Any other last things on that before we move on? So we mentioned that this individual, has to, in some states, has to experience this fear. What are some of the possible dangers and impacts on an individual who is experiencing or has experienced stalking? And I'm thinking about, what are some of the dangers physically and emotionally, and also what are the impacts on this individual's life, maybe with work, with social, where they live, all these different things. How can it really affect them in these different ways?
Well, I'll kind of start with that one, just based on things that we know are happening as consequences. I mean, I think from whether we're thinking about this from a student perspective or an outside of a college environment, just generally speaking, I think in the short term, I think stalking, I know we're going to get to the conversation about what does it look like in popular culture versus what is it actually like. And we always like to make the point that even though it can be kind of dismissed as this sort of romantic trope, right? In the things that we see and the things that we watch on television, the music that we listen to, messages that we receive, it's actually, when it's happening to somebody, incredibly terrifying, because it is a form of psychological abuse. And the I think issue with that sometimes is that we don't really know how that's impacting somebody if we can't see the physicality of it, right? I think a lot of times when we think about power-based personal violence, we look for physicality as evidence that it's actually occurring. And with this type of psychological terror, it's a buildup, and you're not really sure, as somebody who's being targeted by that behavior, what exactly is going to happen and when, right? So it can be a pattern, but also it isn't like clockwork, right? It isn't happening at the same time every day. You don't know at what form it's going to come at you. Sometimes you don't even know, like Ray mentioned, that someone is stalking you to that extent. You know that there maybe are some behaviors that are problematic and you've identified that, but you don't know the extent to which they're actually watching what you do and learning what you do. So I think just knowing that over time and growing, when we think about physiological signs of what that may look like in somebody, it can cause them to withdraw completely, drop out of school, not go to classes, drop out of work, completely quit their program. If they're a college student. I actually know of a case, I won't say at the place, but at an institution in which I worked, we had an issue of a faculty member, it was an instructor, who was actually being stalked by a student in their class. And it got so severe that faculty member actually completely quit and had to move out of state, because it was an instance of this student who was able to look up where she lived, send an actual letter to her spouse that basically declared that they were in love and they were not. And it just got to the point where all the protections, even at a university, all of the potential legal recourse wasn't worth the fear that had been instilled in that professional at a university based on that situation. So I think those are a couple of repercussions, maybe fear of going out, like kind of hypervigilance, always looking over the shoulder. And then it can also be things like anger. I mean, it's a frustrating experience, and we're going to talk about like best practices, I'm sure, but that sometimes it's that sort of like, should we confront them? Should we not confront them? What does that look like? So I think also just anger and frustration over the situation too is incredibly reasonable to experience.
One of the things that we see with intimate partner violence and the stalking that comes with it is the hypervigilance that Denise was mentioning, where it can look to someone from the outside who doesn't understand the full dynamics of what's going on, like the victim is excessively emotional and irrational, and it can easily turn into a victim blaming situation. The other extreme of that we see sometimes is as an emotional protection from the trauma of the constant fear. Sometimes victims, they seem to put up a shield and they don't recognize, even to themselves, how frightening this is, because if they let themselves think about how scary it is, then they wouldn't be able to cope. And so one of their coping techniques sometimes is just putting up a shield so it doesn't feel like they're scared. And so when you're dealing with a state and a court system that requires fear, then that can become an obstacle to getting the protection that's needed, which is yet another reason to get counseling and legal help early on in the process when the stalking begins, so that it's possible to deal with it in a way that's healthy emotionally and productively from a legal and protective standpoint.
Yes, I feel like y'all covered most of it. Just something to add on is, Jennifer, you were saying how like it affects the whole person, it affects emotionally, physically, maybe it's the loss of time of work, if they just are having a emotional day and need that break, and or safety, they need to like stay home to feel safe, and or like property damage and things like that. Kind of the intersection between stalking and domestic violence or interpersonal violence is that it's one of the biggest factors to see, but not maybe to see, but like 85% of homicides that were from a previous intimate partner, they were stalked beforehand. So that is just, the majority of it. It's definitely an indicator of just more violence and just danger overall.
Yeah, that's extremely true. And when we're talking about intimate partner and interpersonal relationships, if we even just think of how complex that is, if somebody loves someone that is stalking them and doing these behaviors, like it's probably so conflicting for that person, because part of them, wants the gifts, and then part of them is they don't want to do with this person anymore. They don't want this person in their life. They are experiencing that fear, and so it's such a complex topic, because there's so many emotions involved with it, especially with an intimate partner, and especially with someone that someone was romantically involved with, or even if it was a roommate or a friend or somebody that an acquaintance, somebody that they really cared about in that way. So yeah, it's definitely, and that statistic, and is crazy. That's why it's so important to talk about prevention, because that's really where we're preventing. We're really saving people's lives in that sense, because we're preventing this physical violence from happening. So yeah, definitely important to talk about, what prevention and how we prevent those things, and to identify the stalking behaviors early on so we can get that person to safety. So, and we mentioned this a little bit, but when we're talking about today's society and how it looks today, how do you think stalking behaviors have become more normalized and accepted? And this is where we can also talk about the technological side of things and the media side of things, because this is where this is the most interesting part to me, because, and I'll just share really fast, because we do see in the media, it looks so different than it does in real life and on a level when you're talking to an intimate partner or friend or somebody that's doing this to you. It looks so different. And so I'm very interested to hear your guys' input on that.
I'll say that I'm enough older than the rest of you to have grown up in a world without cell phones or even texting. And so a typical parent today that I see in with my friends and nieces and nephews, the expectation for an instant contact and an instant response from their partner, their child, has created a reality that I think is sometimes counterproductive, because children are expected to respond to their parents' text messages immediately, even if they're at school sometimes. And I worry that that creates a mental reality for that child as they grow up, that this is what love looks like. I always respond quickly. And so whether we're looking at the looking ahead to the future stalker or stalkee, if they think that's what love looks like, that's the behavior they're going to recreate, sometimes out of context, in ways that become really dangerous. And so if you think that responding quickly and getting chewed out for not responding quickly is acceptable behavior, because that's what a parent routinely does, and that's what love looks like in your life, then when an abusive partner treats you that way, you may not recognize those symptoms and those red flags as quickly as you would if that had not been your experience growing up. And so I think it's important as children mature into adulthood that we think about how to make sure they understand from a personal safety perspective, just like we teach them bathing suit areas don't get touched by anybody but the doctor. And even then, you have the right to say no, that putting boundaries around interpersonal behavior and what you will and won't accept and what you think is reasonable is something we really need to encourage. And perhaps at college and in that high school age is a really good place to be focusing on that.
Oh, I've got so much, so I'm going to try to tamper down to share the wealth here a little bit. Ray, I hear everything that you're saying, and I think one of the most difficult things for us as prevention educators of young adults, right, and adults coming into college, is that most of them don't have a space or didn't have a space for this type of evidence-based education anywhere up until the point of our college-based mandates for these discussions, right? And the things that we generally want to do, because a lot of us have seen it. At Texas A&M, we know from anonymous data that we've collected from incoming students that anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of our incoming students have disclosed us anonymously that they have witnessed or experienced directly at least one form of relationship violence before even getting on our campus. So we know that they're seeing it. We know that it's happening. I think with stalking behaviors, this conversation about boundaries is so important because I also worked with at-risk youth in Orange County, Florida for 2 years at a partnered nonprofit with one of our state colleges. And I worked with young people who would have conversations with me regularly that were very skewed between healthy and unhealthy. And these ideas of unhealthy behaviors being normalized to this idea of, well, if this person's texting me all the time and needs to know where I am and who I talk to, it's because they love me and they care about me and they have my best interests at heart. And then this sort of social media aspect to it too, where it's so easy to see what everybody's doing all the time. And yes, we can put controls on and we can block people and we can remove them and take a break and all of these things, right? But unless somebody actively chooses to do that, they can see all the time what someone's doing and get information on them. So from a kind of unhealthy relationship lens, where's that boundary between loving and caring about somebody and then actually engaging in stalking behaviors, whether you unintentionally mean to do it? Because I've had students say to me before, I didn't mean to cause that reaction in that person. I just didn't understand why they broke up with me. And they wouldn't give me an answer. And I just wanted to know why, but I didn't mean to scare them. Well, you did, right? It doesn't matter what your intent was in that moment. No one's taught you those boundaries, and the respect to those boundaries. No one's bothered to have that conversation with you. So now you're unintentionally stalking someone and you've caused them to fear you or be annoyed with you or both, right? And then of course we have the I'm intentionally stalking you to cause fear. In those types of relationships, whether it's a breakup or not. So I think there's so much that we can unpack in this conversation, but boundaries are so important. And we do a lot of education at A&M to try to explore, particularly with stalking, why is it that when we look at every form of power-based personal violence, stalking, for some reason, we can just extract it and kind of minimize it? Well, it's not that big of a deal. If I wait long enough, maybe that person will just go away. It'll phase out, like it's no big deal. Or if that person wants to get up in my face, I'll just confront them back, right? And there's such a misunderstanding about stalking being serious because of the messages that we receive from society about it not being a big deal, or it being something that's twisted from a form of violence into love and care. Because we're not having these conversations with our young people. And I will say, Ray, also to your point, and then I will be quiet for a little bit. It's interesting too that you talk about this age differential, because I had an experience in 2019 when we were doing this programming for National Stalking, what we were calling then National Stalking Awareness Month, where we had an open house in our own building and we served students, and students have declared that they want us to observe this, right? And they want to engage with it. And I had 2 staff members come up in our building during the open house and look at our stuff and straight up have a side conversation. I could hear them, a side conversation, kind of poking fun at it, honestly. Like, why are we doing that? It seems like something we shouldn't waste our time on. That's not that big of a deal. Our students don't experience it. And I was just kind of like, well, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't an issue. So there's that. Also our students have identified it as an issue, and we are student service based, but it's just also, it worries me sometimes that our education has to go beyond the students, because if we're not taking the seriousness of this to the folks who are also impacting those students and those colleagues in their community, then that's also creating, it's not just a problem for our young people. Yeah.
Yes, kind of thinking about like the social media, and something when I was just, preparing and thinking about just Stalking Awareness Month is just the weight of the word, because it was a definitely fun thing to do with friends, is to have their location and to know where they are and be like, oh, they're 5 minutes away, and not saying that is, all the time is bad, but it's just those behaviors of like, oh, I just stalked you on Facebook. And like, I love this post that you had like a year ago. Actually, one of my great friends now, the first time we met, she goes, oh, I've stalked you like twice on Instagram because we had mutual friends. And that didn't, raise a red flag to me, because I was like, oh, thanks. And now we're great friends. And she didn't mean that when she was saying it. It's more of like a general term now, I feel like. And I feel like we need to bring that education, bring that awareness to what stalking is, to bring that like weight back to the word. So when someone, comes to us saying, I feel like I'm being stalked, it's not, the initial reaction is like, okay, let's do something about it. This is serious, rather than, sorry, I just hit my ring, rather than having to ask more questions to realize, oh, you're in danger. This is something that needs to be addressed. And yes, with media and, movies and TV shows that we see nowadays, it's turned into that romantic, falling in love with the person, and they don't know that I love them so much, and once they figure it out, then they'll be with me. It has such a big influence in our lives that we don't even realize it, as we're just casually sitting on the couch and watching the TV shows and movies that are trending or are just popular nowadays.
And I'm just going to add too, I think that's such an important point, Anne, because it lends itself to sort of this idea that we need to create these spaces. Like when someone asks me, why is recognizing National Stalking Prevention and Awareness Month so important? My answer to that is because it is so minimized in terms of its impact. And then we see these messages come to us that maybe we don't even know that we're embodying. Because if someone sees something on television that seems creepy, like I'm going to use the example of You because that's recent, and it's so unique to stalking. It's not just a secondary thing that we're looking at. And you can look at those behaviors of Joe / I forget what he renames himself in the second season. But you can look at those behaviors and say to yourself, wow, that's really out of the ordinary. Like I knew that there was, it frames it for you. And you're like, wow, if somebody did that, I would completely report it. Right. But then we also don't know that we're embodying subconsciously some of these other messages that we receive that minimize the impact of that harm. Right. And so sometimes we're confronted with those messages. And then in real life, we come across somebody who's experiencing this, who's telling us, no, the way I'm experiencing this is different. And so I think creating these spaces is so important with education so that individuals know that they can come somewhere to learn and talk and figure out how, if someone's going to tell me they're being stalked or experiencing that with another form of power-based personal violence, how do I reconcile that difference so that my reaction doesn't cause them further harm or cause them to disengage from me because I reacted in a way that wasn't trauma-informed, or at least caring enough to create that space where I'm listening. So just kind of adding that into why we observe this and why it's important in terms of reconciling those messages together.
Yes, and also just to add to that with the media aspect of things, when we're watching rom-coms and we're watching all of these sappy, cute love movies, which I'm sorry, but I love. I know it's hard. I can acknowledge the unhealthy behaviors in them though, which I think is what we need to do moving forward. Is we can watch them, but we have to just acknowledge those unhealthy behaviors. But the persistence that is accepted and expected in dating and finding somebody, and if somebody breaks up, fighting for somebody. Sometimes the other person does not want to be fought for, and that really starts to lead to those stalking behaviors when they are persistent on talking to this person. And like you said, Denise, that example of asking them what happened, why did this go wrong, what did I do? It's sometimes to I lost the word I was going to say, but to make sure that we're not doing those stalking behaviors, we need to accept the rejection, which is difficult for a lot of people. And again, media is showing us that you don't accept that and that you fight for what you want and fight for what you love. But there comes a time when we have to, say, I don't want to make this other person feel fear because I just really want to be with them. So it's a really fine line that is difficult. And that's why these conversations are important to have, where people can watch this and figure out, where is that boundary? I want to make sure I'm not crossing that line, to make sure that they aren't doing those behaviors in the future with future partners and people in their lives. But yeah, I always think that part is interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think it's important as part of education that young adults and women in particular know that it's okay to end a relationship, and you don't owe them an explanation, because all too often why really means, what did I do wrong so I can fix it and you'll take me back? And the insistence that you're entitled to an answer about why is unhealthy behavior. And I think the statistics around how many more women are stalked than men is in part a reaction, a reality, a result of women being socialized to be nice about a breakup and think they have to give an explanation and tell them why and explain ad nauseum, when sometimes just, this isn't working for me, no, is an acceptable answer.
Yes, exactly. I think teaching children young about that, about being able to accept rejection and accept maybe not having an answer, and making peace with that can really help with our future generations. I think that's extremely important point. So moving on, if somebody believes that they are experiencing stalking, or maybe somebody's watching this and they're saying, hey, I've experienced some of those behaviors, what do I do? So what can they do? It could be legally, or just what steps should they take to keep themselves safe and to make sure that, harm isn't coming their way and that they're getting out of this situation. So this is kind of a general, what can they do to help themselves or to get help or reach out to whatever resources they need.
I guess I'll go first. I think it's going to depend on where the victim is in the process. Is she sure that she's being stalked? In which case, I'd say consult with a legal expert in your state and find out what the standards are for assessing whether or not you're being stalked and what your legal options are. Is it appropriate to call law enforcement? What's the process for that in your community? Are injunctions available to you? Being aware that it's sometimes true that if a victim asks for an injunction, but they don't have quite enough evidence to get it and it gets denied, that will embolden the abuser. So you want to be careful and get good legal advice locally before you proceed in that way. But backing it up a step to someone who may not be sure that stalking is happening, I find that keeping a log of the behavior so that you have an objective list of what's happened with dates and times and what the other person did, and then the context, how it made you feel, can create an objective pattern of information. Sorry, Kitty decided to come visit. She had something to say. It creates an objective pattern of behavior to look at so that it's both useful for reinforcing for the victim of stalking that she's not imagining it, that something really is, or he, that something really is happening. This is not normal. This is not healthy. This is potentially dangerous. And thinking ahead to the possibility of a trial, whether civil or criminal, it becomes evidence in that process as well. And so getting good information written down, not just your memory that can be faulty, that can trick you based on your emotions.
Yes, so locally here in the Bryan College Station area and just the Brazos Valley area in general, so it's like the 7 counties. So Twin City Mission, our domestic violence services, if the stalking has been done by a former partner or current partner, it doesn't just have to be former, sorry, I need to correct myself on that, or a member of the household, then we have our services that we can help with. And we have an emergency shelter if it's something that they need to find a safe place to go to, like in that moment. And women, men, and any children in the household can come as well. And then we also have amazing case managers who are also legal advocates that can help in that, just letting them know their options. And like you were saying, in the Bryan College Station area. And then we also have counseling. We have 3 amazing counselors on staff that, if they need someone to sit down and talk with, we have that service as well. So actually, I got permission from my sister to talk about this, but in college, she was actually stalked. And it was something that, they met on Tinder, and they had just a 5-minute phone call. So she never met this guy in person. And it happened for about like 2 or 3 years where he would just like follow her virtually, sorry, not in person, but on social media, and, message her all these inappropriate things, and she would block him, but he would make a new account and find her again. So eventually what they did is my dad and my sister switched phone numbers. And that is not to say like that is a solution for everyone. But I think, talking to people, getting that help, and finding those creative ways to, find that solution for that specific person.
I'm going to add too, from a I know at the college, we, many of us who are not in our counseling services or our health services are mandated reporters. So it's a very difficult balance for us, because especially as educators, I wish that I was confidential there, but I'm not. And I'm in a position where, based on what we're talking about, I'm likely to get a disclosure, probably more so than other folks wearing different hats. But all that being said, I am an incredible advocate at the university of going with our confidential resources first, if possible. And there's a couple of reasons why I advocate for that initially, outside of a mandated report, should that need to happen. But the reason I advocate for it is because sometimes we know, especially right now in our climate, that maybe calling law enforcement, right, or feelings of reporting to a university like ours that, we just had a report released yesterday that basically clarifies that we're not a diverse campus. We know this about Texas A&M. And so some of our students who are in more of those kind of marginalized statistical populations, they don't see themselves in our services on campus. And so when we think about cultural relevance, and also safety planning, getting a full overview from individuals and professionals in our community who are connected not only to our campus and those services, but also others like legal advice, thinking about crisis counseling, thinking about medical accompaniments, et cetera, that the full range of options happens to be on the table. And in confidence, that decision can be made. What's going to be the safest thing for me right now? Right, based on, do I live with the person who is stalking me and also harming me in other ways? Did we break up? Do we not live together? Are we in the same classes together? Do we work at the same place? How imminent are those threats that are happening? I'll give you one example that we haven't, what if they're threatening to harm themselves? What if somebody broke up and the person is stalking them and they say, well, if you don't come back, I'm going to hurt myself, right? And then it's like, well, what do I do? I don't want to be responsible for that, being something that my ex-partner or my current partner carries out, right? Or this person who maybe I was just friends with or in a class with, right? So it's giving a full range of options, and not only options for safety, but also response options should some of these things come up. And I think that's really, really important, if possible. Now, of course, I'm not going to not advocate for 911 in a situation where someone is stalking someone else and they are outside. It's potentially that they have a weapon. They're threatening to come at the other person or someone that they know. They're outside the house threatening to break in. Those types of things are obviously necessitate calling for security. But those are just things that I do advocate. And just letting our particularly our students who are watching this know that a Title IX report, a mandated report, doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't options still on the table. And I think that's really important for our students to know. It doesn't force you into an investigation process with our university. There's still choice that can be made there. And there are amazing case managers who work, I can only speak for A&M in this runs, but we have some amazing case managers who are trauma informed and do work there. Who can help with those options as well. So just things that I like to recommend because it really is dependent on situation. And I think all of us, we know this in this room, but it's really important to understand that one response option is not always going to be the best for another person. Everybody's situation is going to be different. So that's why I love our confidential resources, because they are so locked in to everything that's going to be helpful. For that person. So that's my lens as someone who educates on this, and also has had connected to multiple personal experiences where I've known individuals who've been stalked, and actually in a couple of cases who've done it themselves, which is a completely different trauma lens to deal with when you know that someone's committing that act and you're friends with them. But yeah, so that's what I've concluded is the best approach through my lens.
Yes, Denise, I agree with you that for every case, it is completely different. And I do want to say that for those in this area as well, Baby's Home is wonderful with that and everything. And we support you guys so much. So if you have those questions or anything, they're awesome. We're here as well. But, we really appreciate having you guys as a community partner in town, because you guys are able to really, help those individuals that have experienced that. So we really appreciate that you guys do that. And on campus, Denise, you guys are, everyone's awesome. And I talk so highly of our community partners and our partners that are, in other states as well. It's just, it's important for us to connect. So, because the whole purpose of us being here today is to help survivors of sexual violence, survivors of stalking, anything. So I just kind of get excited when we all talk about this, because it's important for us to come together and collaborate on these kind of things. So moving along, what would you like for individuals who may be experiencing stalking to know? As we know, when we talk about trauma and being trauma informed, we know kind of some of the experiences and emotions that individuals who've been stalked maybe have. So what are some things that you would like them to know?
I can start off. I think that people are around that care and want them to be safe. Just there's a community, here in the Bryan College Station area, and, I bet all over the world or the country that people are passionate about this and want people to be safe and have healthy relationships, and educate people around them, and the next generation coming up. I guess just that community of people care for them, and that is a serious matter.
Sorry, my key was stuck there. I'm like reaching for it. It's not, I can't use the space bar on this thing. I think Zoom lies about it, but anyway, I digress. But I think going back to this, what I would want some survivors to know, anyone who is experiencing this or has, that regardless of reactions you may have experienced from other people, or fears that you might have, maybe you haven't told anybody it's happening yet because you're worried about what that response is going to be, and that it might not be validating in some ways, that just in this room right here, there are individuals, and kind of putting faces to this issue to show that there are individuals out there who will listen and take it seriously. And I think that's really important to know, that you don't have to kind of sit in silence and hope that this problem just goes away, that there are a range of different options to keep you safe, and that you have choice in it. And this is a really big thing that we advocate for, obviously, is making sure that whether it's someone who's supporting another person who's experiencing violence, or whether they are the recipient themselves, that power of choice lies with the person who's experiencing it. Because really, even when experiencing trauma like stalking, they're going to know best when they feel safe to make a move. Right. And so I think that's really important to know, that especially with your confidential resources, or someone who you trust really well, I know even with large friend groups, no matter how popular we are, oftentimes we can count on one hand the number of people we go to for something major. Sometimes it's not even going to be a parent. Sorry, parents out there, I'm one of them, but I know I'm not going to be the first person that one of my children come to if they're experiencing something major. I'm going to find out about it after they problem solve most of the time, but most of the time this is going to be a trusted friend, or someone they look up to. It's going to be like a resident assistant, a coach, a professor, most likely. That there are folks out there who are going to take this seriously and still give you the power of choice to make that decision. So I think that's really, really important to know that. I know we say you're not alone a lot. It can feel that way a lot of the time, but when you find that right person who's going to listen to you, be non-judgmental, help connect you to resources in the way that you may want to be connected to them and make those decisions, that it completely changes the lens of the experience that you're having, and that empowerment's possible even after it's been taken away. Yeah.
I'd just add that for all of those who are lucky enough to live in a community like yours at the university, where there is dedicated support and education around stalking violence and recognizing it and preventing it from both sides, educating both the victim and the potential perpetrator, many people don't have that immediate resource available. And so know that there are national hotlines, there are hotlines in your own state for domestic violence, for sexual violence. There are women's centers that can provide counseling and talking through, are you in fact a victim, and how you can get some help, and explore what your options are at a personal safety level and at a legal issue level if that becomes an issue. And so often a good place to start is the National Network to End Domestic Violence. There is educational information and links to other organizations nationwide that can provide assistance with identifying stalking, educating, finding an organization close to you that can provide some assistance in a more hands-on, safety-focused sort of way, so that you can recognize the stalking, find a way to put an end to it, and then live your life in a full and healthy way.
Yes, and at the end of this live, we will be posting links in the comments of hotlines and things that we talked about today, as well as all of your organizations and all of those links for if people want to learn more about it or if they need that hotline or anything. So to wrap up here, I would love to hear any final thoughts you guys have, as well as this is a good opportunity if there are any upcoming events that y'all have that you want to promote or talk about. This is definitely the time, or just any last final thoughts. We don't have any questions or anything to go over, but this is just kind of your time to shameless plug kind of time.
I don't really have anything to plug. I'm out of state, and we certainly have the pandemic has caused both an increase in domestic violence and increased barriers to getting out of the house to get help. And so more and more of those kinds of communications are happening by text and by email. And so if that's your situation with whatever sort of interpersonal violence you're experiencing, know that you don't necessarily have to get out of your house to go find help. There are alternatives, and all of the good reputable websites that provide that kind of information will have an exit button so that you can quickly get away, and it won't leave a trail on your browser for your abuser to track and know that that's happened. A really good safety feature.
Yes, so for February, which is so close, which is crazy. Phoebe's Home, so the domestic violence services, we are going to do a fact of the day to talk about teen dating violence, because that's the awareness month for February. So the way to sign up for that will be on our website, which is just twincitymission.org. And that's kind of our fun, but educational awareness that is coming up.
Well, I'm going to start by adding my last comment in, and that's that, no matter what, experiencing stalking, if you're supporting someone, just know that the responsibility is fully on the person who's doing the behavior. It's nothing you did or the person who's experiencing stalking did precipitated it. Absolutely nothing. This is fully on the person who's chosen to cause harm. And so I know sometimes when we're experiencing trauma, we try to justify, like, what did I do to deserve this? Like that whole thing. I'm not going to get on my soapbox about everything happens for a reason, because again, I will always maintain no joy, that's cause and effect. I will always maintain that. And then kind of like, what's your point? Which you should have gotten to in the first place. But I'm just kind of, we try to justify what was our responsibility in having this happen to me. Like we try to take this onus of responsibility, and it's nothing. You didn't do anything, because no one wants that to happen to them, right? No one hopes that they set up a situation where that happens. But the other thing too, we are doing as a prevention ed office, we have a full calendar of events that recognizes human trafficking awareness. Actually, the first year that we did that. So shameless plug, we have a recorded panel online if anybody wants to watch it. It's through our Texas A&M Health Promotion page. But we also fully recognize stalking awareness and prevention, and also do a bit with not so much the teen aspect of dating violence prevention, but we do recognize the dating violence component going into February a little bit. So we do have an upcoming program. Actually, we have one at the end of the week with our rec center, and it's Empower Hour. It's on Friday afternoon, which is kind of like an online kickboxing class. It's kind of cool if anybody wants to register for that. But we also on Monday evening, and Anne will be joining us as well, we're doing a Stalking for Love program at Texas A&M, which is really going to look at these media tropes and how they've been represented in our popular culture going back before, some of them before I was even born, just the way that we've been receiving these messages for decades. And then we're going to have a conversation about really addressing that behavior, analyzing that behavior, trying to overcome the way that impacts us a little bit. And then we also have tomorrow night, I skipped this one, it's really important. Tomorrow night, we are hosting a Facebook Live panel. It'll be through Texas A&M Health Promotions page that talks about cyber abuse. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and how it's experienced, and how people can respond to it purely in an online environment when that's happening. I know Jennifer will put the link in to our calendar for A&M, but it's tx.ag/NSPAM. And it's something that you don't just have to do. We observe programming all year. So if this is a conversation that you want to have with us, we have continual opportunities to engage throughout the year, many, many, many of them. So feel free, Jennifer, full permission to put my email in the comments if you want to reach out and just learn more about how you can get involved or help the community around us. Thanks.
All right. Well, we are coming to the end. And again, I appreciate you guys for taking the time out of your day to discuss this and educate our followers on Facebook, or just those who have come to watch us today. For SARC next week, we are going to be having a Teal Talk Tuesday. We always like to throw those in once a month. And so next week is actually we're going to be talking about consent, because it's close to Valentine's Day and it's important we talk about that. So that'll be next Tuesday at 2 p.m. And we'll be posting a lot about that as well. But if you have any questions, or if you're watching this later on, please feel free to call our hotline and ask these questions or comment, and we will be monitoring those so we can answer those for you. But if this has brought up any, negative emotions or unwanted emotions, please reach out to Phoebe's Home, to us, whoever you need to reach out to get that support, and make sure you are okay after this, and that you are feeling that support and being able to talk about what you're going through. So we are going to end it at that, but I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. 2021, I almost said 2020. We're in 2021. I hope everyone has a great rest of your year, but we will be online again next week and talking about consent. So have a great rest of your week, everybody. And we appreciate you all for watching tonight. All right. Thank you.